All right. I think we are just about ready to go. Doing some final audio checks on sound levels. Bruh. Bruh button appears to be working. Bruh. Maybe a little lower. Bruh. I think we're good. Let me jump over to the Jam stream layout. Make sure I've got everything loaded in there and we will get started. All right. This is a slightly updated Jam stream layout compared to when I was streaming on YouTube. I changed the background a little bit, added the new hex or octagon texture, and added chat. But other than that, it's pretty simple. But we will go ahead and get started. It's weird. It feels like it's been forever since I've done one of these. The last time I did a Jam stream was technically part of the re-debut on Twitch. We did one kind of at the end informally, but I haven't done a dedicated one yet. And so this will be sort of a chance to get the rust off and kind of remember the structure and format that I've used. I will do sort of an intro for today just because I'm going to put this up as a VOD on Twitch. And this will be sort of like an intro for folks who've never seen one of these. Some of the newer folks who started following here on Twitch since I've been streaming. And so I wanted to explain a little bit about what I do on these Jam streams. And it's be a good chance for me to troubleshoot anything with the audio, if anything needs to be fixed. So for those that are tuning in, if you hear anything or you can't hear me for some reason, let me know and I can make some adjustments. I think everything should be fine. When I start doing warm-up stuff, then I'm going to be checking my OBS readout. In fact, I'm going to put that right here so I can see it better. Speaking volume should be fine. Let's see, maybe you can boost dynamics a little bit. Same with EQ. Third track gives us reverb, which we won't need readily. But that should be fine. I can test the audio levels for snares and everything else once I get started. So what's the purpose of the Jam streams? As the name would suggest, this is a chance for me to sit down and, one, devote some time to dedicated practice of beatbox sound and theory. A lot of what we tend to talk about, either directly through something I planned or via questions from the chat, would be things related to beatbox technique and sound theory specifically. Hey, Iconic Boar is here. What's up, Iconic Boar? How are you doing today? Welcome to the Beatbox Jam stream. Please let me know if there's any issues with the audio, if it's either too loud or too soft, especially once I start getting underway making sounds. Speaking volume, I think, is okay. I'm hitting low yellow. But when I actually start making instrument noises, some of them tend to hit the mic harder than others, so I need to be a little bit careful. Iconic says, I'm good. Hope you're well. I'm good, man. I woke up a little more than an hour before stream today. Someday I'll wake up several hours before, so I'm not literally rolling out of bed. But I think we're good. We'll be doing some warm-up and getting things going. So, one thing we talk about is sound theory and beatbox technique. I didn't prepare anything specifically today that I wanted to talk about from a technique perspective, but sometimes when I'm putting things together before the Jam stream, I will come up with a list of sounds or techniques that I do want to cover kind of in a lesson type format. Usually it'll be new stuff or things that I haven't talked about before, so that folks that are watching, if they're curious as far as the mechanics or things that go into sound creation, I can break that down as sort of the discussion for the jam stream and demonstrate, at least from a sound and technique perspective, how something works. Obviously, the mechanics can be a little bit tricky via a VTuber avatar, but for most things, I feel like being able to explain techniques and how they work via mouth mechanics, as they were, is a good start for teaching people about beatbox basics. Another thing that we do on these jam streams is sort of freestyle practice and drills. I need to get better at learning how to come up with patterns and combinations of patterns on the fly because of the environment that we're in now. Hey, Globy just followed. Thank you for the follow, Globy. I hope you enjoy your stay, and welcome to the Beatbox Jam stream. And that is a good test that my stream alerts on Stream Elements are working. I think this was one of the first layouts I added that to. And thank you for confirming that it's working, because I do not like missing follows. I want to thank each and every one of you folks for stopping by and spending time. Globy says, I saw Beatboxing VTuber on Twitter, and I was like, I'm in. I really appreciate it, dude. Hopefully this will be interesting. I know I haven't actually done any beatboxing. I'm doing kind of a bit of an intro, but we're about to jump into it. So to recap, beatbox technique, sound theory discussion, practice, drills, things like basic patterns and construction is something I tend to talk about a lot. And then kind of in conjunction with that, the idea of creating routines from patterns. And we could talk about that a little bit later, but the idea of a beatbox pattern is a combination of sounds that fit into a sound set. So a pattern would be something just like that's just a pattern of sounds. But a routine usually combines patterns into a longer, organized song. That's why it's called a routine. And when you see a lot of beatboxers in media doing things like shout outs and battles and everything else, they're usually doing an organized routine that combines all of that stuff into a cohesive product that they can perform. It's a performance. And we've talked a little bit about that. I have several routines that I've created. I think we've probably seen some of them on stream or back when I did the daily beats thing on Twitter. The idea of taking different things and combining them into a performance is what goes into routine construction. And that's a pretty interesting process, very akin to songwriting. Hey, Penguin Party's here. Penguin says, hi, Raku. Surprise, surprise. I'm at work and came to say hi. Well, I hope your work day is going well, Penguin. Hopefully the weekend isn't too hectic and you're staying sane out there in the working world. Okay, so basic structure of jam streams, sound theory, technique, drills, patterns, routines, and then the last thing is BGM construction. And we tend to do that towards the latter half of the jam streams, depending on how much time we spend on the discussion in the beginning. But for folks that may be tuning in for the first time, my sound setup here is I have my mic that's right here hooked in through my computer on my PC, and everything is wired into my loopstation, which is a Boss RC505 loopstation. And that's my sound setup for beatboxing, because I can tweak a lot of audio things on the fly, which is why I always ask you folks about feedback on audio levels and whatnot. But just to demonstrate, we have a dedicated bruh button. Bruh. I can hit that on demand. Bruh. But what I'd like to do on these jam streams is brainstorm ideas for Bgm tracks to use on content. Things like chill streams and other things where I need background music. I'd like to dedicate time to creating those here on stream because I can solicit input from you folks on the chat. And that's pretty fun. We've come up with some interesting things since I've been doing this. And so, for those that are still around towards the latter half, we will jump back into BGM brainstorming and see if we can come up with some good instrumental tracks to use on other content. And for other content creators that may be either watching this live now or watching the archives later, I put up Bgm tracks that we create on stream here and some that I create offline on my Bandcamp page, and they're up there for download and use for free. Royalty free, no copyright type things or anything. So if anybody who creates content wants to use my instrumental tracks, you can download them for free off my Bandcamp and use them. I would just ask that you give me a credit somewhere on your content. But other than that, if you need royalty-free instrumental beats, by all means, they're there. Penguin says, it's going well. I'm being considered for another promotion and I actually get Sunday off for once. Well, that's good, man. Hopefully your hard work is paying off and your organization is recognizing you and you get to move on up. Iconic says, wishing you the best with that, Penguin. That's right. Good luck. All right, so that should do it for the intro. Again, like I always say, for you folks that tune in, if you ever have questions on anything that we're talking about, just let me know via chat. I have the chat window right off on my other monitor here so I can see what you folks are talking about. But we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to need to warm up since I have not done any warm-up today. But I got water, so we are good to go. For warm-up stuff, I tend to do relatively simple drills and patterns. So I'm going to warm up with some instrument combinations and drum type sounds, and then we'll probably work in a little bit of bass too, since I do need to warm my voice up to be able to do bass. So we will go ahead and start there. So I'm going to just run through some basic freestyle drills, and then we will get started. Hey, Sour Lad's here. What's up, Sour Lad? Welcome to the Jam stream. Good to see you as always. We were just getting warmed up. I was keeping an eye on the readout, and I didn't see anything peaking. Thank you, Iconic Boar, for giving me sound check feedback. Keep letting me know if anything needs to be tweaked as far as the audio levels. What I found is I have my mic sort of at a 45-degree angle to my face. As long as I avoid doing some of the snares like the PF, as long as I don't do that pointed directly at the mic, we should be fine. For inwards K, that one doesn't peak as loud. And then the BGM is the one I have to be careful with because it's the sharpest and loudest. That one I need to be careful. I might need to actually point away from the mic for that. Let me test that real quick. Okay. Let me tweak that a little. I can get closer, but it's harder for me to back off a bit. try that. Okay, that should be fine. As long as I don't point directly at it, we should be good. Sour Lad says, I'm good, and how are you guys? Iconic says, jamming with Raku's always a good time. Yeah. I'm very grateful that folks decided to drop by and are hanging out. Hopefully you guys will find the discussion interesting. So let's see, basic warm-up stuff. I guess to talk about the reason for warm-ups for those who might not be familiar with a lot of beatbox technique. Like any sort of other performance-based activity, because beatboxing relies on face muscles and mouth muscles and things like your voice and your throat for techniques, you do need to warm up. I guess if you've been doing it for a really long time, the amount of things you can do cold are a little bit different. But for me specifically, I need to be able to warm up my voice and specifically my lips for things like the lip-based snares and instruments. Otherwise, they're not clean. So a good example of that would be the Bgm that I was just testing, or spit snare. That one, for me, is not as clean and crisp until my lips have a little bit of blood flow going, which is why do you see me doing lip oscillations as part of the warm-up and practice, because that forces blood into your lips and lip muscles and gets them warmed up that way. So when it comes to any sort of dedicated practice, it's always good to warm up. That way you don't strain specifically your voice. So I'm going to keep going with some warm-up drills, and I'm going to work in some bass stuff too, because my ability to do good basses completely cold is not great. I have to warm up a bit because it's like a lot like singing. Whether it's things like throat bass, your or lower variant of throat bass, vibration bass, like a or even vocalized chest, which doesn't really strain the voice so much, but it's forcing you to force a lot of air through your throat from your lungs, and it's a lot lower. That does require a bit of warm up too, and that's the and we could talk about the difference between the basses and the sort of the technique if folks have any questions. So again, by all means, feel free to shout at me in chat if you have questions on anything we're working on, and we'll just proceed from there. Hey, Martian Tires here. What's up, Marsh? Welcome to the Jam stream. I am in the process of warming up, so we are just getting going. But yes, welcome. So let's see. Warm up for bass. We'll work this in with the stuff we've been doing for all the other instrument practice, and then that should wrap up the intro and warm up portion of today. So let's see. For throat bass, we can do something like I'm gonna go through a lot of water today. Still think we are fine on audio. Iconic says awesome. Thanks, Iconic. You're too sweet. Let me change the caption here. We'll still be transitioning off of the kind of warm up, but I did want to get into some sound theory discussion. So we'll do practice drills. Marsh says your branding as an alien really works well with the beatbox. Really cool. Oh, thanks, Marsh. Interestingly enough, I did not learn how to beatbox when I was living on Homeworld prior to coming to Earth. In fact, I've been here on Earth since 2001, but I've only been beatboxing for about 2.5-ish years. It was spring of 19 or 18? 19. I think 19, yeah. It'll be 3 years in the spring of this year. So I haven't been doing it that long. Admittedly, I'm kind of a newbie when it comes to beatboxing, but I'm trying to get better. Bruh. Let's see. Marsh says, "Oh, sometimes the stars align. What made you want to start beatboxing?" Good question. That's a good thing for us to talk about here, since it's been a while since I've kind of gone into the whole origin story. But the way I got into beatboxing is actually not very elaborate or fancy. I spend a lot of time on YouTube. That may become apparent the longer you guys hang out, but I watch a lot of YouTube videos and content because I don't watch TV. And let's assume it was around the spring of 19. So I'm pretty sure that's when I started. I got a random recommendation for a beatboxing video. I think it was like top 10 drops in beatboxing routines or something like that. And I'd never really crossed paths with beatboxing. I'm a big music head and I listen to lots of music, but I've never encountered the beatboxing community, and nobody I immediately know beatboxes as part of that scene. And so I got this random recommendation on YouTube, and I said, "Oh, that looks interesting. I know what beatboxing is. It goes back to the 80s and has a pretty storied history with the upcoming of hip-hop music in the 80s, right?" And so I said, "Okay, I'll check it out." And I looked at it, and it was really neat. It was a lot more elaborate and interesting than I ever thought the beatboxing scene and technique involved. Just to give you folks an example, the beatboxing I knew from way back in the day in the 80s was a bit, I won't say more simple, but it was definitely different and kind of in its more early evolutionary phases. So you'd see kind of a lot of percussive based sounds, but things like throat basses. And you go back and listen to like the Fat Boys or people out of the 80s era of hip hop when it was coming up. People like Biz Markie or Dougie Fresh, the old school founders of beatboxing. A lot of their stuff is very kind of percussive and very hip hop oriented. And so you'd have them doing things like, and it'd be not overly simplified is what I want to say, but it was definitely more of a specific style, and that's what I immediately thought whenever I hear the term beatboxing. But you watch this video about drops, and all of a sudden you start seeing like dubstep type beats where people are integrating things like drops in this one particular video. So instead of just the percussive sounds, you're getting a lot of these very unusual basses and things like the lip roll technique, which we can talk about later, which is a lot more recent in the last 10 years of the beatboxing scene. Things like using lip mechanics and parts of your mouth to create noises in addition to just the percussive stuff. And that's how you get that's the dry lip roll, which is my follow sound, if you guys ever hear that on stream. And in conjunction with the idea of drops, heavy sounds, things like dubstep, the inwards lip roll is a lot more forceful and sounds like a drop type sound, and that's the and kind of an extension of that would be like a low 808 sub bass lip roll, and that sounds like, I notice that doesn't pick up as loud because it's so low, but the is how people can construct things like those really heavy low drops that'll shake speakers. And so you're watching some of these people out in the scene that are pros doing this, and I'm watching this going, that's insane. I didn't realize there was so much complexity to beatbox technique. And so I watched the video, and just like YouTube does, whenever you watch one thing that's within a certain type of interest group or subject matter, the algorithm starts recommending more things like that one thing that you looked at. And I started getting all these recommendations for other beatboxing videos, things like competitions, battles. It's usually a lot of things people see. The Grand Beatbox Battles, or GBB, a big international event that was, prior to COVID, held every year, usually in places like Poland. And that's where all the big names and competitors out in the scene get together and they compete in different categories on stage in front of a massive crowd. And so that stuff started getting recommended to me. And you see these videos of regular looking folks, dudes, ladies, and all that, performing in front of a massive crowd like they're, famous musicians. And turns out they are famous musicians. But I was watching all that going, wow, there's such a scene I never knew existed for the beatboxing community. And I just started watching more and more, thinking, wow, that's just so neat to watch. Listening to all the styles and the way people created their own music and had their own personal influence on it was just fascinating to me. And so, like you do when you get pulled down a rabbit hole, I just started watching more and more. And eventually, the algorithm started recommending tutorials to me because I guess they kind of know the direction people go when they get sucked down a rabbit hole. And I found a wealth of information and tutorials on YouTube from folks out in the scene, people I saw competing in videos, and folks that had been there for a while. They said, hey, you want to learn how to beatbox? Well, these videos are going to teach you all of the basic steps of learning sounds and technique, how to do it, what the mouth position looks like, all of that. And I just started at the beginning. I have a bit of an informal music background. I don't play any instruments actively, but I did a long time ago. And I just started from the ground up, like everybody does. They always say boots and cats, right? Learn the basic kick, hat, snare, and started with the kicks, and the hats, and a snare. The first snare I ever learned was an outwards K, I believe. It was either outwards K or PF. Outwards K sounds like, and just practicing those basic sounds and saying, okay, you learn how to do all those, they're relatively simple. Now try and create beats and learn how to sort of keep time and basically become a percussionist, like you're on a drum set. So you start off simple, just things like, and then get in the habit of your mouth being familiar with the positioning for all of those individual instruments and start putting them together. Then you start switching up the rhythm and you add a kick here or add additional hats and you start going, or you might do a hat run like you would on cymbals, like a, and you start messing around with just variations on the tempo and rhythm and instruments and get familiar with, kind of switching around. And then from there, you start messing around with the actual speed that you're doing things. So from the basic kind of like 4/4 tempo, you learn how to speed it up and get familiar with pulling those sounds from your instrument list, as it were, faster. And then from there, you say, okay, that's kind of like a rock, hip-hop-ish type beat. What if we were doing something dubstep-ish that has a little bit more of an irregular rhythm? I don't know what the time is. I'm really bad with time signatures, so for music background folks, feel free to correct me if I misspeak. But you take the same sound set and you adapt it to a dubstep beat, You might get something like learn how to do that. Then you start making that more complicated. So you add double kicks or triple kicks, and then the beat might become something like that. And then the more you go and want to push it, you start doing things like just high speed. And a good practice type of music for speed, I find, is drum and bass. I love drum and bass, but it's very different from your standard hip hop type tempos. And it allows you to sort of work on speed and stringing together sounds in fast patterns. And that's how you're getting things like and then, you know, the faster you go, the more complicated you make it, then the more used to you are adapting on the fly. And so going back to Marsh's original question, starting from the ground up and saying, okay, I figure I have a fairly good grasp of the basics. I'd say it took maybe 2 weeks or so of practicing the basic stuff. And I thought, okay, you know, I can do basic drum sounds. What do I want to learn next? And so the neat thing about the way beatboxing works is everybody's path and journey to what they learn and what they specialize in is different. It depends on where they start, what they focus on, and what they choose to sort of diversify as they're learning and consuming material. Unless you're in an instructed class where everybody is learning the same way from the same instructor, no two people are going to have the same path through beatboxing because preferences, interests in different techniques are going to be different. So people are going to focus on different things. Like for me, as a big hip hop person, I think I kind of focused more on hip hop to begin with. So a lot of the initial things I was learning was different snares. And so it's kind of like a way to discuss sound theory for folks who may not have seen a jam stream before. You talk about the instrument set. I talked about the snares. And the snare that I mentioned that I first learned was the outwards K, which sounds like. The way I describe the mechanics on that would be like saying K without the vocalization, so just. But you take your tongue and seal it to the roof of your mouth and force the air for the K kind of around the sides. And you're forcing that pressure to come out from a very specific spot. So instead of just with your tongue in the way and forcing it from the sides of the corners of your tongue, rather, it goes from to, and you keep your tongue in position when you're doing the repeated K sounds, and then that's how you get that sharp noise. And you change the position of your mouth from just an open to cutting off the sound, or even changing how open your mouth is, and it changes how the snare sounds. So it could go from to and cut off that way. Another sound that they usually teach beginners that's relatively easy is the one I mentioned earlier, the PF snare. And the PF snare, any of you folks listening can do this, I guarantee it. It's just a P sound, a P without the just P, 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 and an F sound, a F, back to back in one. So instead of going P, F, you're putting them together and doing them at the same time and focusing that sound right from the middle of your lips. And so the P, F together becomes P. And when you first learn it, it's not going to be clean and crisp like that. That's practice over time. But combining the P sound and the F sound is how you get the P snare. And that's really handy because it sounds like a standard, regular, unfiltered drum snare. And you can mess around with things like opening your throat and changing the inside of your mouth to change how it sounds. So you might go from like a to a more low kind of echoing or resonating PF snare by just dropping your jaw, and it would sound like the regular one, or the lower one would be subtle. But usually those two, outwards K, PF snare, are the ones that they teach in the beginning. And once you get kind of a grasp for doing those and you work them into beats, and learn how to kind of do them on demand instead of just in a vacuum. Then you start branching out into other types of sounds depending on what style of music you want to create, what do you prefer, what are you interested in. So for me, going the hip hop route, the next snare that I think I focused on that took me a little bit and is definitely more tricky is the inwards K. The outwards K snare, again, is the one that sounds like. The inwards K, which is usually the first beginner wall, in fact, sounds like. It's got that kind of sharp hit, and it's a little bit breathy, and overall it sounds different. So if we play them back to back to get a contrast, you have outwards K, PF, inwards K. 3 distinct sounds that are usually kind of the core set of beginner notes or instruments in a beatboxer's toolkit. And I can go into the mechanics of doing an inwards K, but it's a lot more tricky. I always recommend that people watch some of the tutorials from folks in the scene on how to do inwards K, because it's usually what's kind of stumps people in the beginning, because you have to breathe in when you're doing it. And I can do a real quick explanation here for folks that are listening, but if you're ever serious about learning it, there's tons of tutorials that explain it in a really detailed manner, and people will show you from like a mouth position perspective how to actually do the sound. But if you think of the same position that I talked about with the outwards K snare, where you take your tongue and you seal it to the roof of your mouth and completely block your airway. And so I can't do that while talking, but if you completely seal your tongue to the roof of your mouth and make it so you can't breathe any air in, that's the first step. The next step would be timing that inwards breath and sealing motion with dropping the back of your tongue slightly to let the air through. So if you do that slowly, when it's sealed, it goes from to kind of faint. It's not very loud, but if you just drop the back of your tongue and keep the front sort of in that upper position, just drop the back of the tongue a little bit, it lets air pass, and that's how you're getting the kind of a gaspy noise. But when you do that, that's the part of the motion. And the trick of learning the muscle memory for an inwards K is doing it in one motion and then getting more of a pop from the back of your tongue as you're letting the air through. So you're timing all of that at once, and it's very tricky. It's not an intuitive motion because no one does that naturally in their day-to-day. But when you do all of that and practice it over time, it goes from just you start getting a sharper noise, and then practicing it further, it becomes, and you get that sharp noise. Again, interesting technique and very kind of unorthodox in its mechanics, but it's useful because, again, inwards versus outwards sound, so you can use it to take in a little bit of air when you're doing a beat. And I guess the contrast, for the sake of the discussion here, would be if you're doing all outwards percussive noises, something like all outwards, and you have to stop to take a breath. But if you're doing the inward snare, you're taking in a little bit of air at the same time while you're doing the rest of the sound, so it's outwards and inwards. So it would be, and it's a little bit easier to regulate more prolonged patterns because you're getting a chance to breathe in a little bit. It's not a lot. Usually if you're doing something complicated, you're going to have to stop and breathe anyway. But it ties into one of the core principles of beatboxing, which is regulating airflow. It is one of the most important things you learn as you're doing sounds. How much air you're putting out and how much air you're taking in so you don't pass out from lack of oxygen on stage or whatever. And a lot of that technique and theory comes from how are you going to put your sounds together that'll give you a rhythm to regulate how much air you're breathing. Because you could do something really complicated that's going to exhaust your whole air supply, but you're going to have to stop and breathe, and it's going to break up whatever it is you're doing. But if you're mixing things up and giving yourself certain sounds within your chains and patterns that allows you to breathe in at the same time, then you don't have to break things up. It could be something kind of like a whistle noise, like a in between sounds, and then you're breathing in that way. It could be something like an inward lip roll, like I demonstrated earlier, where you're doing maybe a whole sequence of drums, and then you have kind of a low bass type, not necessarily a dedicated drop, but a low bass sound. So maybe if you're going like the inwards lip roll, that heavy bass sound is letting you breathe in, and you're taking air in at the same time, and you're not having to stop, break everything up, and breathe in that way. So that's sort of an idea, and I kind of look into the whole idea of mechanics and where sounds come from and how it fits into whatever it is you're doing. There's a lot of kind of careful and methodical things that go into beatboxing that I guess most people wouldn't think about. Most people think, you're just making mouth noises and you're making it sound like music. But in reality, there's a whole lot you have to consider when it comes to how you're creating all those mouth sounds and music. And that I think is very, very fascinating. We could talk all day about things like how the theory affects what you do, but all of that stuff was what I had to learn when I started getting into beatboxing. And I guess as the final answer to Marsha's original question, all the stuff that I watched on YouTube is where I gathered that information and knowledge. I have taken lessons, and I do know a professional beatboxer that I met online, but all the stuff I learned, I'd say 95% of what I learned was via YouTube. And that's why I say anyone can learn how to beatbox. I'm not a percussionist by nature. I can keep time decently well, but I had no inclinations towards percussion or rhythm-based music at all. And if I can learn it, then any of you folks that are watching can learn it. And I'll always do my best to try and explain and talk through things when we get these jam streams going. Just in case folks are curious and want to learn, then maybe I can point you in the right direction and get you into beatboxing, because we could always use more folks in the community. Bruh. Yeah, very good discussion. Moving on for the practice and drills part of the discussion today, I did want to dedicate some time to technicality. For those who may have tuned in when I was streaming on YouTube, I tend to focus a lot of discussion around the idea of technicality because it's one of my favorite aspects of beatboxing. And for those who might be tuning in for the first time today, I will give some background as to what that means, just so you guys are familiar with the terminology and what I'm talking about. I don't want to talk to you folks like you know all this already, because that's a ridiculous assumption. Iconic says, anyone can beatbox. Raku, the chef Gusto of beatboxing. That's true, man. It seems daunting, but if you break it down into simple components and start from the basics, it's just like learning to draw. I only say that because I know Marsh is in here, and Marsh is a very talented artist. Nobody starts off knowing how to draw fully realized, detailed, rendered pieces. If you're a painter, you don't paint the Mona Lisa day one. You start off learning how to use a paintbrush, learning how to move it on the canvas, and then you practice, you learn techniques, and you get better. Beatboxing is the same way. It's a grind like any other art form. Iconic says, yeah, everything is a skill you gotta learn. Yep. And because we live in the modern age of information, the stuff to guide you there and resources, they're out there. So let's talk about technicality, and hopefully we won't spend too much time on this and get into some actual drills. For those who might not be aware, the concept of technicality is very simple. It's sound combinations in beatboxing. And the reason why it's called technicality, I assume, is because it's a very technically complex theory, but it's very simple at its core, because it's just combining sounds together to create the combos which slot into patterns, and then those patterns slot into routines. And the way I sort of equate technicality is kind of like a drum fill on a drum set. I don't think it's a one-to-one necessarily, but it's very similar in concept. So let's say you're playing a rhythm on a drum set and you have a break in between a measure and you want to ad-lib or fill in some sounds. I would assume that's kind of where the term fill comes from. But if you have a beat like a and you want to ad-lib or add in filler sounds in between the breaks in that rhythm, you might get something that sounds like. And so the is a sequence of sounds in between the actual measures of the rhythm. And for that one, it would just be like a two hats and like an additional kick type sound. Like a triplet rhythm slotted in, and it's like a filler sound. Well, the same thing exists in beatboxing to some capacity, and to me, that's what technicality is. Someone who's been in the scene longer than me might have a more historical definition of where it comes from. But what does that mean for actual beatboxing? So the concept of taking sounds and instrumentation and putting them together in between whatever it is you're doing functions almost identically to a drum set. That's why I use that example. And so the one I've been working on for a long time that's been my most developing technicality sound has been what's called the TKK. And folks that have seen my jam streams before know I've talked about this several times already. But the TKK is a triplet pattern, and it uses a hat, literally just a T sound. Anybody can make that sound, I guarantee it. And the second part of the triplet is a K sound, but it's not a K snare. So if you think of the letter, saying the letter K without the A, just a K sound. So, and then the third part of the chain is an actual snare, something I haven't talked about yet, called a rim shot. And I won't get into the mechanics of that because that sounds a little bit tricky too, but it's done like the inwards K, except you use mouth pressure instead of a breath to get that same kind of sharp pop sound. A rim shot sounds like. Again, if you compare an inwards K to a rim shot, it's basically a shorter, faster burst type sound, but it's very similar in actual sound on the ears to the inwards K. But you can do it faster because you're not breathing. So the technicality pattern goes TKK. Very simple. And the reason why it's so versatile and is usually what people learn when they're trying to pick up technicality and practice is because you can fit it in between sound sets, much like that drum fill example I used before. So let me try and think of the best way to demonstrate that. If we were to do kind of a slow drum and bass rhythm and do something like drum and bass adjacent, right? If you take the TKK and slot it in between the measures, then it becomes and the is being used as a filler sound. A good way to add variation, and when you're doing faster patterns, chaining those combos together gives you a lot more flexibility to do a lot more interesting things with your patterns and rhythms. And so anyone, after enough practice, can fit in that triplet pattern and just, do the. But the key thing about technicality that I find so interesting is because muscle memory and just muscle strength and endurance is what it is from a physiology standpoint, the more you practice technicality, the faster you get with it and the more you can do with those sound sets. And so what I've been practicing is learning how to chain the into a continuous series of TKKs. And that's how you're getting kind of like a roll type sound. I don't know if it's got a dedicated term in beatboxing, but when you start learning it, you're doing things just like triplets, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, and you're getting, which is kind of like a disjointed sequence of rhythms in a triplet pattern. But the more you practice it, the more you learn how to do it fast because your mouth gets used to the position, and it starts going from that sort of staggered pattern to more of a, and getting endurance allows you to do that faster. And that's what you start slotting into your patterns and routines. And so it changes the way the sound behaves and the sort of versatility, because now you have more of kind of a complex rhythm that you can plug in instead of just a triplet sound. And what I've been experimenting with is adding things like an FT, a sound in between to change up the rhythm. So instead of just a, you might get, and all of a sudden it becomes 4 instead of 3. And the thing about technicality that makes it fun is that it's very easy to just practice when you're doing something mundane, you know, washing the dishes, and you can just be sitting there going, and you can do it without thinking, and it becomes second nature. But my goal is to figure out a way to sort of optimize that pattern and switch up the different sounds so that I can do some more fun stuff with it in routines and patterns on demand. That's kind of the next step. A lot of these I can sort of do, but fitting them into a rhythm I'm still sort of getting used to, because it requires switching from whatever you're doing to the sound combo position, as it were. But even taking something like the and changing the position of your mouth as you're doing several of the chains in a row, instead of just doing, you might open and close your mouth, and it changes how the sound sort of hits when it comes out. So it might become kind of hard to do on the fly, but basically just opening and closing your mouth means it's coming out slightly different whenever it is you're doing. And so technicality is very interesting. It's kind of, you kind of think of it like plugging and playing when it comes to a rhythm. A good example, and one I talked about before, is the first chain or set that I learned when I was trying to learn these sound combo patterns is the TKP. And for that one, again, triple it again, just like the other one, but you do a and you do a, so it starts the same, but the last one, instead of a rim shot, you just have a P or a soft B. So similar, but again, not the same. It doesn't have quite that sharp sound, but as you practice it, it goes from just a simple triplet to a faster triplet to a chain, and you can do a roll with that as well. And that was actually the first quote unquote speed pattern I learned how to do, just practicing it over and over. And so the TKP sounds like, and you can tell I'm a little bit better at doing that one because I've been doing it longer. But that becomes the sound chain, and you could do things like adding in that FT in between that, and you might get something like a little bit subtle, or you flip the sequence of syllables around for KPT. You put the K sound first, and then you do the P and then the T backwards, or reversed rather, and that becomes, and it's slightly different because the sounds are coming out in a different order. But as far as what that means for a beatbox pattern, kind of the point of me even mentioning this is you take the sounds and you start learning how to fit them in to whatever it is you're doing. And now that I've kind of mentioned it, whenever I'm doing kind of pattern practice, you folks are probably going to be able to hear it and pick up on that. So let's see, if I just try and improvise something real quick and demonstrate what I'm talking about, we might get something like, And so to demonstrate what I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes, all of the quote unquote speed sounds you're hearing in between the basic drum rhythms of what I just did is technicality. It doesn't have to be fast because you can be doing slower beats, but it's those filler sound combos in between that give you so much flexibility to play around with whatever it is you're creating in beatboxing. And I think that's incredibly fun and neat because no two people, again, are going to come up with the same style of implementing technicality in their sounds. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. You could even do things like create your own combos just by experimenting with 3 sounds you pull from the instrument list. You might do like T, TB, Bgm snare. You might go like, and then that becomes the same thing. So you might do, and then, you've created a different pattern for you to use. And it all comes down to where the sound comes from, how you do it, and then how efficiently it filters into whatever you're doing next. If you're doing a sound that's inside your mouth, and then you have to transition to something that's done with your lips, maybe you find that it's too clumsy to try and transition that way. So instead you come up with another sound you're going to string together that comes from the same inner mouth position, and you can do easier. And that's kind of the creative aspect of beatboxing that's endlessly complex and endlessly customizable. So that's what I really like talking about when it comes to technicality. It's just very fascinating, and you can never be good enough at it. You can always be practicing. I'm hoping to get more consistency and speed with the I think one thing that I found out actually was yesterday, it was that recent. One thing that helped me get speed and a little bit more consistency is keeping my jaws closer together instead of opening my mouth. Do the I think reducing the amount of space is making it easier for me to actually transition between those inner mouth sounds. So if I keep my jaws closer together and do that sort of TKK roll, that's how you're getting the and at some point I should probably start writing this stuff down and putting the notation on screen so you guys can hear and actually see what it is I'm trying to practice. But that in a nutshell is the explanation of technicality. And by all means, if you folks have questions or anything related to what I'm talking about, again, always just stop me and say, let me know. Hey, Lion Ashley Kennedy is here. Lion Ashley Kennedy asks, where is your girlfriend? Girlfriend? What do you mean? Oh, are you asking about you're asking about the person who was co-hosting with my last stream? Since I think that's the first time I saw you jump on there. Are you talking about Wazi? Wazi is not my girlfriend. I would like to make that abundantly clear if that's what you're asking about. Wazi is a friend of mine I know via the internet, and she is happily married to an awesome dude named Matt. So, yes, she is not my girlfriend, and let's be 100% clear there, because I don't want anything to get misconstrued. And if Wazi was here, she'd probably tear my head off for that. But yes, she is frequently my co-host on the God Hand streams. It's either her or her husband, Matt, or both of them. I think one of the archives I put up had all 3 of us on there for maximum chaos. But just to clarify, since, again, Lion, I know you're relatively new. Good question. Hopefully that addresses that, and we're good. And for the rest of you that know Wazi, do not go around calling her my girlfriend. She will kill me. And Lion Ashley Kennedy says, finishing God Hand? Yes, we are going to be picking up with another session of God Hand next week. Right now, our schedule for God Hand streams is every Thursday, because that seems to work best with the Toxic Cure crew. And I believe next week my co-host is going to be Matt. I think Wazi's got a thing anyway. And Matt will be jumping on, and things will be a lot less chaotic and hopefully more chill. But I anticipate we'll be able to make it through the next couple levels in God Hand, and we're more than halfway through. So hopefully we can finish the game by March. We'll see. The last few zones in that game are ridiculously difficult, so I foresee that taking more time. But yes, absolutely. To Lion's question, I'm gonna be finishing God Hand on hard. I have never not finished a game that we did a dedicated playthrough of, with the exception of Nocturne, because I got distracted. Maybe I will get back to Nocturne in the future. But for God Hand specifically, since that's a near and dear classic and one of my all-time favorites, I'll be finishing it. It might be pain, and I may end up having to donate a bunch of subs to the Toxic Cure channel, but I will do it. And then we will figure out what we're going to do after that. Iconic says, "You got this, bud." I've beaten God Hand on hard before, but it's been over a decade. So, yes, we will resume the adventures of Gene and his tendency to get trolled by demon drops and all that other stuff. I ended the last session in a really difficult spot too, just because we've been going for 4 freaking hours. I'm not looking forward to having to start up right before the Tiger Joe fight, but we will do what we can. Bruh. Okay, so let's see. Looking back at the time and what we've covered so far. So we talked a bit about the initial sound theory. We talked a little bit about technique, and we went into my origin story of learning to beatbox, which, for those of you that have heard that for the first time, hopefully it'll give some context as to where I came from in beatboxing. And then we've talked a bit about things like technicality and the idea of sound construction. So I think before we switch over to the BGM and loopstation part of the jam stream, I'm going to finish out the practice session just by doing some additional freestyle stuff, just so I can practice a bit. And again, 1, keep the blood flowing, and 2, make sure we're primed and ready to go for the loopstation and BGM. I did want to kind of see if I can experiment with something from the techniques side, but I don't know if I can do that well on this mic. So we'll see. I'll run through some freestyle drills, and then we'll wrap up the practice portion of the jam stream and move on to the collaborative part where you folks in the chat help me come up with ideas for Bgm tracks to use in actual content. So we will close out with some additional patterns and practice, and then we will proceed from there. And maybe I can sort of segue with an actual routine. This isn't just a pattern. This is an actual routine that I did create, and I created during the Daily Beats series of things on Twitter. But it'll be a good demonstration for how routines are kind of structured. Iconic says, "I got to go now. Raku, thanks for the great times. Best of lucks with your beats and stay awesome, friendo." Thank you, Iconic. Always a pleasure to have you here hanging out. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope the rest of your weekend is awesome. I'll catch you later, my dude. All right, so this particular routine is called Filtered, and this will be a little bit more fleshed out than the one I did for the Daily Beats. So let's give it a try. Still trying to figure out how I want to structure the last part of that routine, the slow breakdown to the slower rhythm. I thought about doing a different type of a bass and drop, but I haven't quite committed to it yet. I'm still sort of kicking around ideas, but I do want to have it go from a drum and bass sort of fast type rhythm to that slower, kind of more hip hopish type breakdown. But haven't quite figured out how I want to sort of tweak things. What you guys heard there is kind of a prototype version of that routine. And I say prototype, but I've had that one just sort of cooking for like a year. But we'll see. I kind of like the idea of changing the section where it's going. I don't want to change the notes for the bass part, but maybe changing it from a closed mouth throat based to like a more open one. You could do something like that could work. It's a little bit more difficult because I'm doing snare sounds in between, but I will figure that out at some point. But let's see. I guess I'll do one more string of freestyle stuff to sort of demonstrate what we talked about so far, and then we'll start up with the actual BGM. So let's see. Well, that peaks really high. Hopefully that's not too loud for you folks. Whew. All right. What I was trying to do there was experimenting with an actual mic position, like I would be if I was on a stage. When I'm doing a vibration bass, which is the one thing I see people do in order to sort of create kind of a more controlled way that bass comes out and give it more force is to cover their nose, since that's where the sound is essentially coming out from when my mouth is closed, and kind of capturing that around a mic to get more of a resonating sound. The problem is, I think my particular mic, which is different from a stage mic, isn't going to lend to doing that too well and might actually cause it to redline, and I don't want to do that. So my apologies if that the first section of that caused it to just blow your speakers out. Not my intention. Maybe one of these streams I'll hook up my actual performance mic and experiment around with mic position. That could be fun. But from there, we will move on to the more interactive part of the jam streams. We will move on to some brainstorming for Bgm tracks. So I don't have to change anything sound-wise.
Bruh.
We'll leave the bruh button on for now until we need to use track 5 on the loop here. But one thing I want to experiment with today, and this will be a good way to demonstrate how my loop station works for those that may have not have seen it before. I want to experiment with some more long form rhythms instead of just 1 or 2 measures like I usually do. And I may have something that'll be useful for that later. But in the meantime, in fact, let me change my caption since we're now doing loop station stuff. One sec. There we go. Now we're good. What I mean by more of a long form rhythm would be if we were to think about a section that's going to be repeating over and over, and for those who may not have seen me do my loop station stuff before, this will be a good sort of primer, an intro into that. A typical couple measure rhythm might be something like, and then that repeats over and over again. But a longer form rhythm that I'm thinking about experimenting with here might be something that goes, that's just a random improvised rhythm. But that whole section you heard me do is what would be repeating. So it's a much longer chunk of a rhythm, same tempo and time signature essentially. But instead of it being a real simple snippet that's being repeated over and over again, I want to experiment with something that's going to be a little more complex. And it should give us more options to sort of tweak and add things in between. So let's see, turn my fader up about there. For folks who may not have seen me demo the loop station before. Again, my equipment that I'm using is a Boss RC505. I may need to add a card to my stream channel explaining this particular piece of hardware and maybe my mic setup in case any folks out there are curious as to what devices I'm using. But the loop station captures input done through a mic and, like the name suggests, loops it over and over again back to back. So if I were to take that previous example and see if I can do it on the first try and just go, fill around with the rhythm or the levels on the volume, you folks should be able to hear that. And so what I've done is I've just captured that real simple rhythm and it's just cycling over and over again on loop track number 1. I've got 5 in total. And what I can do using the loop station is take a single track and I can overdub additional layers onto it, or I can record on a new one. And what we could do, just to demonstrate, turn my headphones up here. We can double up the snare and go. It's subtle, but I added a K snare on top of the PF, so you have a little bit of a sharper hit kind of over the top. And we could do that again with something more, even more pronounced, like the BGM or the... And if we overdub that, it would sound like... And now you can hear the clap type snare over the top of the whole thing. And then likewise, we can continue to overdub. I don't think there's a limit. I think it'll just keep adding layers on forever. I've never tested it. But we can also use undo redo, which is a really neat command I just learned recently, to undo the last overdub layer we put on a specific track. So if I wanted to take the clap off, then I just do that. If I wanted to put it back on, off, on. Very handy function. And if we move across the other tracks that I've got here, if I wanted to add something like a lip roll to the other one, let's see, maybe something like, and then add it. So let's try and loop that. For folks watching, let me know if the level on the actual loop tracks is too high. Depending on what sounds I'm putting in these, I'm seeing that it is topping out in the yellow in OBS. But as long as you can hear me over it, then it should be fine. So anyway, that's a real quick and dirty demonstration of how the loop works. It's just capturing sounds and repeating them over and over again. And then one thing you can do is add track level effects and input level effects, which we'll sort of get to as they sort of come up. But just to demonstrate, if we put this real simple rhythm back on, and we add what's called beat repeat. What beat repeat does is it grabs a section of the looping tracks that are playing that are under its effects, and it repeats them, like the name would suggest. And it's a real interesting way to set up rhythm variations when you're looping. All I have to do is turn it on and off, and this is at 50%. It's off. And you could set it up like drops if you really wanted to, or you can just create an alternate version of the rhythm that you're going to be looping indefinitely. It might sound like, that's what, 8th notes. Yeah, any faster than that and you're going to lose the actual tracks because it's so quick. This is quarter notes. So switching between quarter and 8th notes is how you're getting them. Maybe I'll actually do something with this. I was creating this just as kind of an example, but we might be able to do something fun with this. So we'll keep it for now. So what we have is a bass rhythm. We have sort of a, I guess like a synth line with the lip roll. Now we need bass. And my go-to is usually a preset on the loop or an instrument type called guitar to bass because it's real handy. And what I can do is kind of demo that here. I'm gonna have to turn my dynamics off, so my mic boost is gonna be a little lower, but basically what guitar to bass does is it takes a sung note and it adds a bass line underneath it, like you'd be playing on like a string or an electric bass. And so it takes a rhythm, or not a rhythm, a melody, and it creates bass lines out of it. And it's real handy and simple to use, which is why I tend to default to that as my bass type. But to demonstrate, let's see if I can capture just a simple bass line to pair with what we have here. And then we'll add the synth line back in and see what the whole thing sounds like. So when I turn this on, you guys aren't going to be able to understand what I'm saying. So I'm just going to noodle around and sing some notes and try and come up with like a couple note bass line to combine with our hip-hop-ish type beat. So let's go guitar to bass. Let me turn that off for a sec. I think my rhythm was off by like a half measure. That's why it was staggered that way. Let me try and do that again. That's interesting. For some reason, it is not snapping accurately to the bass rhythm. I wonder why. I wonder if it's the measure length that's causing that. Let me try and do this differently. Oh, I think I know what's causing the problem. Hold on. Let me put dynamics back on so I can talk normally. I forgot about how the loop sets up the bass BPM and what it syncs. I think it's the bra button that's throwing everything off. So let me take that off. One thing I realized, and I believe it's one of the built-in settings to the loop, and I don't think I can disable it. Whatever you record first, I think sets the bass BPM that everything else is going to be syncing the tracks to. And because this particular file that I loaded on the loopstation had the bra button just already recorded, I think it's trying to sync everything to whatever BPM it recorded for the bra button. And I forgot that it does that. So let me see if that fixes the problem. So let's see. Because we want everything syncing to the BPM of that percussion track, not the bra button. So let me go back to the baseline thing here and see if that fixes it. Oh, interesting. It still is syncing to a different... It's still syncing to something different. I wonder why. Okay, in the interest of actually moving forward with this, I'm going to change the rhythm and make it more sustained instead of rapid. And then when we load up another track for a different BGM thing, then I'll make sure it's completely zeroed out from scratch when I record everything, and then that should keep it from getting kind of distorted. I'm gonna try one more thing here and see if that fixes the problem with the syncing. If not, we'll just create a new file. Weird. Figured that would fix it, but let's do this. I'm going to clear off everything and we'll start from scratch. and then see if that problem still persists. It shouldn't. So let's see, we'll do that. Everything's cleared off. Don't have anything on track 5. So let's try and establish a bass rhythm again and follow the same exercise and see if things sync up differently now that there's no establishing pre-recorded layer on here to kind of mess with things. And maybe I'll do something real quick just to sort of test it, and then we'll actually try and construct a track from the ground up. So let's see, we can go. All right, the sample beat's not exactly on time, but it did confirm that I think everything is syncing properly now. So we're good there. Put my dynamics back on. Okay, so now we're good to go as far as working on constructing a track from scratch. Sorry for the sort of weird tangent. I wanted to make sure nothing was funky with my loop settings here. So we'll go ahead and save that. And so going back to the idea of experimenting around with sort of extended rhythms instead of just short measures, I did get something that, in fact, Edward sent me earlier. Let me see if I can pull it up. You guys might be able to hear this, but that's okay. He sent me the Purdy Shuffle, which is, I think it's a jazz rhythm. And I thought it'd be interesting to try and replicate something similar to this for a beat here. So let me see if I can play this. This is a YouTube video, but you guys might get the audio since the audio is playing directly into my loop station. So let's see. Yeah, okay, that was the one I was thinking of. So it kind of sounds like it's going. So I kind of want to take that idea and see if we can come up with an extended rhythm and sort of construct a track around it that way. So we could try and go something like. Kind of a staggered hats, snares, and a double kick. So let's see if we can capture that and see what it sounds like. So we go. Oh, whoops. Hold on. I gotta do that over again. I had dynamics set. I had EQ instead of dynamics set on my track 1 effect. Or input effect 1. That's why it was so soft. So let's see if we go. We could even try and switch it up a little bit. Let's see if we can get something a little more complicated. Well, not if we switch the rhythm up in between. Let's see. Okay, I think something like that could work. I just need to get it to loop properly so there's no gap on the end of it and a break. So let's see. Might have to shorten it a little bit so that it's not broken up quite so abruptly like that. Let's see. Let me try a shorter version of that same extended rhythm. And go. I think that'll work. I think I'm still cutting it off too late. Normally I don't have a problem getting things to seamlessly loop. Let's see. There we go. All right. So now I need to think if I want to switch up or add anything to the rhythm layer. We could double up on the snare and add a reverb effect. Let's see what that sounds like. I do like the way that sounds, but I missed on the second snare, so it's staggered. Let's turn that off. Try that again. Missed again. That's a little bit better. Now let's see if we can get the bass line to sync up correctly, like before. Hey, Edward's here. Speak of the devil. I'm messing around with that Purdy shuffle rhythm you sent me, Edward. Also, welcome to the stream. Always a pleasure to have you hanging out with us, Edward. Let's see. I'm going to test out recording the bass line, and we'll see if all the syncing problems that I was running into when I had all the other tracks interfering are gone, and we'll make sure. In fact, I'm going to try a bouncy rhythm and see, since that's what was causing problems before. So I'm going to switch on guitar to bass and mess around and see if I get a clean loop for the bass track, and then from there we'll sort of figure out what we're going to do for the actual Bgm track itself. All right. Yeah, I think the syncing is fine now. I'm gonna keep the sound levels about there. Are you folks able to hear the loop track in the background? Is it audible while I'm talking? Let me know if it's too soft. Okay, Edward said sounds good. All right, thanks. We'll leave it there for now. Now for the third track, I kind of want to mess around with that filter granular delay preset I was talking about before. I don't think I've showed that on stream for you folks yet, but let me see if I can turn it on. The problem is I won't be able to talk when I'm doing it, but let me see if I can get the presets right and just record something, then I'll switch back and explain it. All right, let me turn that back on so I can talk again. So the effect that I ended up getting was not what I was intending, because I need to go back and figure out what I wrote down for the sound settings. But by messing around with the granular delay and filter at the same time, that's how you're getting that really kind of subtle, I don't know what you call that. It almost sounds like a melody sound played in reverse. And it's very, very soft, so I have to fade it all the way up on that one. Hopefully you can hear it. It's kind of interesting. In fact, I can boost that by messing with the track level volume. One sec. If I boost up the track level volume to like almost 200%, then now you can hear it. Edward says, kind of reminds me of Josuke's Crazy Diamond. Are you talking about the effect when it heals things? Like that kind of rewind sound effect? Yeah, it sounds like you're taking a sequence of synthesizer notes and running them through a filter in reverse, because that kind of noise is coming from the filter preset. But that is interesting. I like that. I need to mess around with filter a little bit more in conjunction with other input presets because it's very powerful. You can use filter normally, just to demonstrate. And you can use it to just sort of create a muffled or less muffled effect over the whole thing. But when you're using it as an instrument, and interestingly enough, you guys wouldn't be able to hear it when I'm doing the input on the mic, but that weird reverse filter noise was done with clicks. So I was messing with the filter knob for the instrument input, and then just doing like, that's the rhythm I was doing, but because the filter effect combined with granular delay creates this combination of sounds, that's what it ended up coming out. So very, very interesting. And I think if I were to structure the actual performed version of this particular track, I'd want to use a track level filter like I'm doing here. And interesting, the rhythm itself, I was kind of going for a bit more like a jazzy hip hop type sound, but we seem to have entered the realm of trip hop with this combination, which is one of my favorite types of music genres. So I'm definitely okay with that. So let's stop for a sec. I'm gonna save this sucker because I do like what we've come up with so far, sort of unintentionally. So if we were to think about how we were performing this one, let's see, what if we started with that weird filter melody? It is interesting that it starts off kind of in the middle due to where I started capturing the loop. So we could do something like start with the rhythm. That's what lo-fi turned on. Actually, let's put filter on input effect B. And I wanted to mess with the beat scatter, shift, or repeat functions on A. We'll see what that does. Oh, that's interesting. This is beat repeat at about a quarter. I'm trying to capture the repeated section at the part of that melody that goes up high. There we go. This is turning reverse on for just the rhythm track and having that little section that is captured with beat repeat cycling over and over again. Let's turn that off. That could be an interesting way to add in an alternate version of the rhythm. I don't know if I've done that on any of my Bgm tracks so far, is we have like a repeat of the whole thing, but then we turn on reverse. Because the reverse version actually sounds pretty decent. Sounds like a really sharp, abrupt record cut, moving backwards. Interesting. We'll kind of bank that for a potential switch up to the main rhythm for this particular track. I wonder what the other beat adjustment presets do to this particular rhythm. That was repeat that I messed with earlier. This is shift. Shift moves everything sort of forward in a measure. I don't think I like the way that sounds because it pushes the high synth melody kind of out of sync with everything and kind of sounds weird. This is scatter. Let's see, the scatter pattern 1. 2. 3 doesn't sound too bad if I kind of play around with the interval for the actual scatter. That's not bad. I like how it pulls in the high melody and then it repeats it back to back because that's the scatter pattern. What does 4 sound like? That's just more of a double repeat of the middle sections of the part. If I was going to choose one of the preset patterns for beat scatter, I think 3 would be the one I like the most. And that's at 50%. Interesting. It's a let's see. Let's go back to how we would structure the actual song. I'm thinking because of the way the high melody is synced to the original rhythm, we'd start with the original rhythm first with just an empty drum line. So it would go. We bring in the high part, then bass line. I wonder if it would make more sense to cut the melody off of the reverse part. Let's see. Yeah, I think I like the way that structure is a little bit better. So we might have the intro start up with the rhythm in all 3 tracks. We switch to the alternate version of the rhythm on reverse, cut out the high melody, have that run for a few measures, and then maybe do like a filter transition. And then we bring it back with the all 3 together. So let's see, how do we structure that? Starting from the beginning. Switch to reverse. Trying to get the filter transition and then flip over to the rhythm and unreverse it is going to be challenging. It's too bad I can't set that up as an under redo. Okay, I think that's a pretty functional setup for this particular track. The real question is, what do we want to call this one? For those who might be new to the jam streams, when we're working on these Bgm tracks, I'll usually ask chat to come up with a nice, clever, usually pun-related name that I can give the individual tracks. So I will open it up to the folks that are watching. We have kind of a trip-hop adjacent type of sound and structure and rhythm. What do you think would be a good name for this one? Maybe something that keys into that kind of unique sound effect with the high melody. And I don't think I've put anything like that on one of my tracks so far. Yeah, I'll leave it about there. I don't want that to be super loud on the track. I was thinking something kind of like, because we have a reverse, something like maybe call it high skip. What do you think, Edward? What do you think would be an appropriate name for this one? We could call it skip reverse because this is one of the first tracks I've ever done that has the reverse featured prominently as an effect. Usually what I do whenever we have these jam sessions and we come up with stuff for the Bgm tracks, I'll have to go back to the archives and figure out what we decided on for the naming on some of these, because I will forget. One thing I'm hoping to do this weekend is sit down with the loopstation and record a whole bunch of tracks from our previous streams. I'm probably 5 jam streams behind in tracks, but my plan is to record a bunch of the BGM stuff we've done up till now and a whole stack of stream sounds. And depending on how many of the stream sounds I get, that might be enough to finish the first collection. And if it turns out we've got enough, then that might be posted on Bandcamp this month, which will be good. There's some old stream sounds in there from way back at the beginning that aren't available for people to download because they haven't been posted yet. So I will see how many I end up with, and then I'll probably announce something on Twitter once I figure that out. As far as the BGM collection number 2, I think we might be... I actually don't know. Might be close, but I know we're close on stream sounds. Alright. Unless anyone has a better suggestion, I'm going to go with skip reverse on this one. Let's go ahead and stop that. Save our settings. And I think what I'll do is copy this into a new one. I'd like to work on one more BGM track for today's jam stream. So let's see, we'll save this. Oh, okay, 17. Track 17. We'll clear all that off. Now, real question is, what kind of style or tone do we want to establish for this new one? The last one was a bit more kind of subdued and kind of more mellow and chill, thinking about some of the other ones we've done here on these sessions. I kind of want to do something that's going to be a bit faster, but the real question is, what sort of genre or style would we want to experiment around with next? We could go for something like EDM, like kind of like a club or like a dance themed type song. That could be fun. And I guess a good way to set that up would be to at least establish a rhythm. I know the typical kind of club style ones just be like a... And we could try and construct the rhythm by layer, since it's something I need to... That's something I need to practice a little bit more. Lion Ashley Kennedy asks, am I a BTS fan? I don't really listen to K-pop. I know who BTS are. I've heard some other stuff, but I don't actively listen to them. So I guess I could say I've heard of them, but I'm not really an active listener. But good question. Let's see. If we do construction of the rhythm by layer, we could do, let's see. I'm going to set up a kick line first, and we'll see if we can record things kind of in conjunction and see what we get. So we can go... That's the kick line. Now, can I get hats on here. But not if I record by accident. Okay. Because the measure section is so short with that kick, if I try and layer on the hat, it's going to cycle. So let me try and redo that again. We go for kick. I'm trying to think of a different snare. I want to do something that's a little bit different in sound from what we did before. So we could do maybe... We can use BGM for this. Let's see. We'll go. So how many repeats is that? 2? 2 repeats. They can add a throat kick on top of the regular one. So we can go. I was thinking about adding potentially a hi-hat run or something to go along with this. And I want to make it a little bit different from some of the other ones we've done before. So we could add something like TSF instead of just a constant run, which is what I usually do. Let's see. I think I'll leave the hat run the way it is for now, and if I feel like changing it, I'll either drop it out or re-record it. But let's see if we can get a bass line. I kind of want to do a lo-fi guitar to bass mix to get something a bit more kind of distorted and gravelly instead of a clean string bass. So let's see, where's lo-fi? All right, this is what lo-fi. 50. Maybe we put a little bit of lo-fi on, and then I'm gonna pair that with guitar to bass, and we'll see what we can come up with what it sounds like. Hey, Sour Lad's taking off. All right, catch you later, Sour Lad. Thanks for tuning in, man. Hopefully these last couple exercises were interesting, but I will catch you next time. Have yourself a good evening. All right, go lo-fi, guitar to bass. I'm messing around with the timing of where I'm putting the bass line. I do like the combination of effects with the guitar to bass and the lo-fi getting that kind of distorted fuzzy sound. But I'm trying to figure out where to put the actual start of the bass line, so I keep re-recording it. So let me figure that out. Yeah, it's interesting. Just messing around with a simple, I'm putting a simple one note bass line on here because I want to see how it's syncing. And I wonder if it's because of the length of the measure. Because it seems like it's not quite synced to the original rhythm. Let's see, turn this off. And the reason why I could tell it's not synced, hold on. Turn my dynamics back on so I can talk. If I start both the rhythm and the bass line at the same time, they don't start at the same point. And I think it's due to how I recorded the actual bass and where it cuts off. So I think it's kind of staggering the loop. And as a result, when it's trying to repeat it back seamlessly, it's getting confused. So let me see if I can fix that. What I'll do is I'm going to just turn on guitar to bass and see if I can mess around with the timing. And then if I can figure out where to get it to start and stop, then I'll go and add the lo-fi effect back in. Yeah, interesting. I think I see the problem. It has to do with the length of the measure, I think. Interesting. I don't think I've ever run into that problem before when I've been working on loops. So I may have to check my settings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mess around with recording a bass line, try and get the timing to sync up, and then we'll play everything together and we'll see how it sounds. All right, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try one more thing and see if I can fix the problem. If not, then I'm gonna have to tweak my settings and work on this a little bit offline. I'm gonna copy a different series of settings in here, and I'm gonna re-record what I just did and see if I can get the syncing figured out. So let's see. We'll clear this. If not, what we'll do is we'll make that a focus for the next jam stream session. So I don't want to waste your time here. So let me see. All right, this is an older one that I have banked and I need to record at some point. But I'm gonna copy these settings into a new track, and let's try that again. And we'll just see if it's different. Okay. What I've done is I've wiped everything off, and I have it resaved in here. And let me do a short form version of that sort of EDM type rhythm just to test, and we'll see if it works. So it'll be, I'll do two. And we'll leave the hat run off for now because I just want to focus on getting the bass line synced. So we go guitar to bass and lo-fi again. Let's see if we can get to sync better. It looks like the syncing issues are gone. I wonder if it had to do with the settings of the previous one I copied over. I will need to look at that further, but this looks like it's behaving normally. I'm able to sync stuff fine. I don't have any issue with staggering the loop. So I guess we can try and grab a functional bass line, pair it together, and then I think I'm going to call it good for this particular session. I don't think I've mentioned it so far, but whenever I'm doing these jam streams, I'm standing up so I can reach my mic and I can have my loop in front of me. And I've been standing for almost 2.5 hours and my feet are getting tired. So let's see if we can get the bass line, and then we will call it good and come back to this one in the future. All right. It could be interesting to pair that particular bass line with a clean version of the same thing to boost the overall low end. But I think that's a good base that we can use to work off of for something with this one in the future. Could be fun to pair something like this with an actual drop, since I don't really do a lot of build-ups to drops. Do something like that. Okay, I'll make sure and save this. I'll make a mental note of our work in progress one for track 17, and what we'll do is on the next jam stream we'll pick up with this one and see what else we can come up with. I'm not sure what was going on in the settings that were causing issues with the loop, but I think we are good now. But that being said, we will go ahead and wrap up for today. It was good to sort of get back into the swing of things with these jam streams. I will think about what I want to cover and talk about in the next one. And it'll sort of depend on what I want to focus on, but we'll definitely get back to more brainstorming ideas for Bgm Tracks and loop stuff. But thanks again, as always, to those that stopped by and hung out. Again, hopefully this was interesting for folks who are new to beatboxing. But we will definitely be doing more of these in the future. So let's see who's online. We should go raid someone. Nobody I know is live. I'm going to need to figure out how to pull up the general list of people. But no one on my immediate list looks like they're live now. So we will go ahead and... Oh, you got a person, Edward? What's their name? I'll look them up. First, we will go ahead and go to the outro, but go ahead and give me their name and I'll look them up. Pomeroy. Okay. Let's see if I can find them. This is looks like a craft channel. Is that the one you're talking about, Edward? Thanks again for all the folks that dropped by. I will catch you folks in the next streams. Have yourselves a good evening.